On the evening of July 22, 2018, three sisters stepped onto a train in Concord, California, heading home after a day spent with family. They were laughing, talking, and moving through the kind of ordinary moment that most people never think twice about. Within the hour, one of them would be dead. Another would be fighting for her life in a hospital bed, and a city that already knew grief too well would find itself torn open by the kind of loss that does not heal quietly. Nia Wilson was 18 years old. She was the kind of person whose presence filled a room without effort. Her smile was wide and immediate, the sort that made strangers feel like they had known her for years. She loved music and dancing and carried a vision of her future that was still being built. She talked about opening her own dance studio someday. She thought about becoming an EMT or a paramedic, maybe working in criminal justice. Whatever path she chose, helping people was always at the center of it. Her family described her as someone who consistently placed others ahead of herself, someone who moved through the world with a rare kind of warmth. Nia lived in Oakland with her family, including her father and two of her sisters, Taya and Latifah. The Wilson family was close. That closeness was on full display that Sunday when the three sisters made the trip out to spend time with their Aunt Teresa. Teresa had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and the family had gathered to hold a celebration of life while she was still well enough to be present for it. It was a day built on love and the kind of togetherness that families hold on to when they know time is running short. By around 9 in the evening, Nia, Taya, and Latifah made their way to the Concord BART station, the Bay Area rapid transit system that would take them back home to Oakland. They called their father to let him know they were on their way. Everything felt normal. Everything felt fine. What none of the sisters knew was that a man at that same station had already noticed them. Surveillance footage from the Concord BART station captured what happened next with quiet, unsettling clarity. As Nia, Taya, and Latifah descended the escalator toward the platform, a man in a white and gray hoodie watched them from nearby. He pulled his hood down and removed his sunglasses. He looked around the station slowly, taking in his surroundings. Then he reached down toward his pant leg, removed something, and quickly concealed it under his sweatshirt. No one around him noticed. The platform was busy, filled with people moving in and out, paying attention to their own evenings and their own destinations. The man followed the sisters onto the train when it arrived. He sat down near them. For multiple stops, he kept his eyes on them behind his sunglasses, watching without drawing attention. He did not speak to them. He did not approach. He simply watched and waited, and the three young women had no reason to believe they were being observed at all. The train moved through the stations one by one. When it reached MacArthur Station in Oakland, Nia, Taya, and Latifah stood to get off. MacArthur was a transfer point, and they needed to catch another train to complete the trip home. The man stood when they stood. He walked toward the doors when they walked toward the doors. He stepped off the train, close behind them, moving at the same pace, blending into the flow of passengers. Taya moved through the doors of the next train first. Then a woman with a baby and a stroller began backing out of the train car, her stroller coming through the doors before she could see the people waiting on the platform. The baby inside caught Nia's attention, and she leaned toward it with a smile, the way she always did with children. She and Latifah took a step forward, moving to board the train. Then everything broke apart. Latifah heard the sound before she understood what it was. Nia lurched forward suddenly, her body thrown by a force Latifah could not immediately see. In the next instant, Latifah felt something tear through her own body. She turned and saw blood. Nia screamed that her neck had been hurt. The man was already moving away, pushing through the crowd and disappearing before anyone could fully process what had just happened. Nia Wilson had been stabbed twice in the neck. Latifah had been stabbed as well. The attack lasted only seconds. By the time the doors of the next train opened and closed again, the man was gone. Latifah pressed a blanket a stranger had thrown over Nia's wound, trying to stop the bleeding with her bare hands. She did not think about her own injuries. She pressed down and she talked to her sister and she tried to hold on. A security guard eventually pulled Latifah away, making her understand that she had also been stabbed and that she needed help too. But Latifah could not think about herself. All she could think about was Nia. Nia Wilson died within 3 minutes of the attack. She never made it onto the next train. She never made it home. A police officer nearby had already been alerted and was moving toward the scene. The same surveillance cameras that had tracked the man across the platform and through the station now showed him running past a body camera, pointing up toward the platform as he fled. He moved quickly through the crowd out of the station to a nearby bus stop. He boarded a bus and rode it away from MacArthur. After the bus reached a certain point, he got off and walked out of range of the cameras. He had a plan. He had changed his appearance, leaving his backpack behind in a nearby parking structure before making his escape date. He had thought through the exit before the attack ever happened. He believed he had gotten away clean. Several miles away, the Wilson family received the call that shattered their world. Nia and Latifah's father rushed to the car the moment he understood something had gone wrong. The call from his daughter had been frantic, almost impossible to understand. He drove to MacArthur Station, not knowing what he would find. What he found was worse than anything he had imagined. Ambulances were lined up. Police were everywhere. He saw Latifah being loaded into an ambulance, blood running down her arm. He turned and ran up the stairs, and there on the platform was his youngest daughter lying still. The moment broke him in ways that would take years to process. Latifah fought through her injuries at Highland Hospital, surrounded by family who had come running the moment they heard. When she regained clarity and learned that Nia had not survived, the grief was immediate and total. She had pressed that blanket to her sister's neck. She had told Nia she had her, that they would get through it, that Nia was her baby sister. The weight of that moment would stay with her far beyond the physical wounds. Meanwhile, the investigation moved quickly. Footage from cameras in and around MacArthur Station gave a detailed picture of the attacker and his movement before and after. The backpack he had left behind in the nearby parking structure was recovered within hours. Inside it were personal items that allowed investigators to identify him. His name was John Lee Cowell. He was 27 years old, and he was a convicted felon currently out on parole. His criminal record included assault with a deadly weapon and armed robbery. There was no known connection between him and the Wilson family. No prior relationship, no shared history, no dispute of any kind. He had selected them as targets in a crowded public space for reasons that had nothing to do with anything they had said or done. By the next morning, Cowell's photograph and identifying information had been shared with the public. The residents of Oakland mobilized. Nia's family, her extended family, friends, and strangers all began searching. Social media spread her story rapidly. The hashtag Say Her Name, a phrase born from a movement to bring visibility to Black women and girls who had been victims of violence, was used to amplify Nia's case and push for accountability. Within hours, thousands of people knew her name. Around 1,000 members of the Oakland community gathered at MacArthur Station for a vigil, standing together in grief and demanding that justice be found. The vigil was still going when an anonymous call changed the direction of the search entirely. Someone on a BART train recognized a fellow passenger as the man in the photographs that had been circulating online. The train was heading directly toward MacArthur Station, the same station where Nia had been killed and where the vigil was being held. Officers moved quickly, racing to intercept the train before it arrived. They did not know Cowell's intentions. They did not know if he was returning to the scene deliberately or whether he posed a further threat to the crowd gathered there. When the train reached MacArthur and the doors opened, officers searched every car. He was not there. But at Pleasant Hill Station, roughly 20 minutes away, another search was underway. Officers found John Lee Cowell standing directly in the middle of a doorway. They approached him and asked his name. He gave it without resistance. He did not run. He did not fight. He was placed under arrest without incident, less than 24 hours after he had stabbed 2 sisters on a train platform and left one of them dead. The arrest brought relief that was inseparable from grief. Nia was still gone. Latifah was still healing. The Wilson family had not slept. They were still absorbing what had happened, still moving through the early hours of a loss that would never fully leave them. But the man who had done it would not walk free, and that mattered. John Lee Cowell went to trial in February 2020. His defense was built around a claim of insanity. He entered a not guilty plea on those grounds. And when he took the stand, he presented a version of events in which he described believing that the Wilson sisters were aliens who had kidnapped his grandmother. He performed erratically in court, shouting and cursing at the prosecutor when the surveillance footage was played, disrupting the proceedings even after repeated warnings from the judge. At one point, he had to be physically removed from the courtroom. But while his behavior in court was chaotic, the evidence told a more precise story. The surveillance footage documented a man who had made deliberate choices from the beginning of the encounter. He had selected a target from among many people at the Concord station, specifically when he saw 3 young black women. He had followed them across multiple stops without acting, biding his time. He had concealed a weapon. He had stored a backpack with what appeared to be a change of clothes in a nearby parking structure before the attack, creating an escape route. He had walked calmly past a police officer during his flight, pointing in a different direction to redirect attention. Every element of what he did before, during, and after the attack pointed to planning. There was more. While Cowell was in custody, phone calls he made to mental health caregivers were reviewed. In those conversations, he revealed that he had deliberately stopped taking his prescribed medication before the trial began, a calculated move designed to make him appear more unstable and less legally responsible for his actions. The insanity defense, it became clear, was a strategy rather than a reflection of the truth. The prosecution examined whether to add a hate crime charge. The evidence supporting racial motivation was substantial. At the Concord platform, dozens of other passengers had passed through that same space. Cowell had ignored all of them. The moment he saw 3 young black women, his attention locked onto them and never shifted. After his arrest while in custody, he went out of his way to engage a black female deputy and directed racial slurs at her without provocation. Investigators concluded with confidence that the attack was racially motivated. The racial element was unmistakable. Despite the strength of that evidence, District Attorney Butch Ford ultimately recommended pursuing premeditated murder and the special circumstance of lying in wait rather than the hate crime charge. The reasoning was strategic. Lying in wait was documentable and concrete. The surveillance footage showed exactly what it meant. Cowell had watched and followed and chosen his moment, and that was what the family wanted used to ensure he never left prison. The Wilson family agreed. The judge was not swayed by Cowell's courtroom performances. Ruling that he had been legally sane at the time of the attack, the court moved toward a verdict. John Lee Cowell was convicted of the murder of Nia Wilson, the attempted murder of Latha Wilson, and the special circumstance of lying in wait. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would die behind bars. For the Wilson family, the verdict was a moment of profound and complicated wait. There was relief. There was the knowledge that Cowell would never be free to harm anyone else. But it was also a moment that made everything permanently real. The trial was over. Nia was not coming back. The machinery of grief, which had been running alongside the machinery of justice for nearly 2 years, now had nothing to run alongside anymore. It stood alone. Nia and Taya's father carried his daughter's name as a responsibility, a calling. He thought of her constantly in every decision, in every morning. The grief did not diminish with the verdict. For Nia's mother, Alicia, the disbelief never fully converted into acceptance. She had driven from Sacramento to Oakland after that first phone call, waiting for a second call that would say her daughter was okay. That call never came. The trauma of losing Nia, she suffered a stroke in the aftermath and faced limited mobility on one side of her body. The loss had cost her not just her daughter, but parts of herself. Latifah wrestled with a guilt that no verdict could dissolve. She had been standing beside Nia. She had held a blanket against her sister's neck. Yielded to hold on. The question of whether she could have done more would live in her body and mind long after the physical wounds healed. Therapy became essential, so did meditation and the presence of loved ones who refused to let her carry it alone. Slowly, she and Taya began to find themselves again. They knew what Nia would have wanted for them. Nia had always worried about the people she loved more than she worried about herself. She had even told her family before her death that if she or someone she loved were ever targeted because of their race, she wanted them to keep fighting and hold the person accountable. She had not only imagined a world where that could happen, she had already decided what to do if it did. Her funeral was held with hundreds of people in attendance. She was dressed in white and her casket was white too. Doves were released. The people who came were not only family and friends. They were strangers who had read her story online, community members who had never met her but felt her loss as something shared, something belonging to all of them. Her school honored her at the graduation ceremony for the class of 2018. The seat she would have occupied in that class was not forgotten. Her diploma was acknowledged. Her father stood in that moment and carried the full weight of everything she had dreamed of accomplishing and never would. NBA star Steph Curry held a high school basketball showcase and dedicated the event to Nia, raising more than $20,000 for the Wilson family. Tributes from athletes, musicians, and everyday people across the country continued to accumulate. The name Nia, which comes from the Swahili word for purpose, became something even larger in the months after her death. It became a symbol of what is lost when lives are cut short by targeted hate, and what the living choose to do with that loss. In 2019, Nia's family established the Nia Wilson Foundation. The organization was built around the values Nia had lived by: compassion, service, and the belief that everyone deserved support and dignity. The foundation provided mental health counseling, homeless outreach, self-defense classes, and employment opportunities for young men and women in the community. It was the closest thing to a dance studio she never got to open, the closest thing to the EMT career she had imagined, the closest thing to the life she had been building. It was her purpose, carried forward by the people who loved her. The Wilson family has never stopped thinking about her. They find her in small things, in everyday moments, in the stubborn presence of joy that grief cannot entirely take away. A dog that demands morning walks and refuses to let her owner stay still. Sisters who sit with their pain and refuse to be consumed by it. A father who carries his daughter's name into every room he enters, every conversation he has, every morning he opens his eyes. They will think about Nia for the rest of their lives. They have decided, with everything they have, that they are going to make it. And Nia Wilson, who wanted to help people, who dreamed of healing and protecting and fighting for what was right, continues to do exactly that. She does it through the foundation that carries her name. She does it through the community that rose up in the hours after she died and refused to let her story disappear. She does it through her sisters who are still here, still standing, still saying her name.